Hello and welcome to an album review of the new Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. This came out a few days ago. I first listened to it last night, and it's pretty exciting that we finally have a new Kendrick Lamar album after about 6 years. I'm a pretty huge Kendrick fan. I'm sure most people that are like into music are. He's one of the most critically acclaimed artists of our generation, including by this critic right here in my top 50 albums of the 2010s list. I put three whole albums made the cut. This is a feat on that list that was only beaten out by Kanye. Kanye had four on the list, but if he had put anything out since 2017, I'm pretty sure it would have given pretty good odds to tie Kanye there. And normally, if I'm really excited about a big release like this, I'll make a live reaction video. You've seen quite a few of these on the channel where, I strap on my headphones, I listen along, I sing and dance and whatever. If I'm so inspired, I maybe make some notes, and then afterwards we do a little discussion. I hesitated to do that this time, and I actually ended up skipping it because I thought it'd be really cringy. There's certain sorts of music that if you record how you're feeling when you're getting into it and you're really feeling it, it's kind of embarrassing, given who I am and stuff. So instead, I just had a really nice time. I sat out on my balcony. I enjoyed the cool night air. I had my really nice headphones. I read along with the lyrics on my phone and really kind of thought about them. It was a wonderful time. So yeah, like, what did I think? What did I think of this album? Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I was blown away. I expected to like it. I've liked everything he's put out so far. I'm always really interested in his next career developments and everything he does, but I honestly did not think I would like it anywhere near this much. There was so many things that I wanted to praise and to remark on and to highlight. And I also realized that it really kickstarted a lot of thought processes for me about how I relate to art in general and what art can mean to me and what it means for me to really like something and to really think something is really important and precious to me. And, I thought this is a great example to talk about those sorts of things and to dive a little deeper into these ideas in my mind. So, gear up. It's going to be a long video. I'm sure you can see based on the video length. All right, so first we'll start off with some general praise. This is one of those albums that seems too perfect for me. And this is why I was really blown away by just how much I liked it, even with my high expectations going in. There's just so many things that line up with like the major foundational elements of some of my other absolute favorite of all time records. I really like big, sprawling, major albums that are sometimes multi-disc, multi-hour, that just feel like they build up an entire world within them with their own internal stories, their internal mythos, connections that are made just across the album, setting up things that later pay off as if you're writing not just an album, but like an entire multi-volume fantasy epic or something. And Kendrick here is so ambitious and grand, and it measures up to some of the stellar examples of this in my mind, like Joanna Newsom's Have One on Me, Swan's To Be Kind, or Sufjan Stevens' The Age of Odds. My mind is blown that Kendrick had already made two of the boldest albums in this mode of the big, sprawling, world-creating album in the genre of hip-hop, Good Kid, Mad City, and To Pimp a Butterfly. And then he's like, no, that's not ambitious enough. That's not big enough. We can go even harder and make something even bigger and with a larger scope. It blows my mind. What a talent. I also really like very deeply introspective albums where the primary focus is the psyche of their performer, just diving into what it means to be them and how it feels and what they're struggling with. And the harder it is, the better. If they plunge so eagerly into the most challenging and scariest and most sensitivist parts of someone's mind, then it's all the more gripping for me. And here he goes in deep into it as My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and Blonde, absolute masterpieces of this introspective mode in hip hop. And then also stuff like Mount Eerie, the self-titled album, which again is just wrestling from within the mind, but in a totally different genre, a totally different mode. And he strikes out on his own kind of mental journey with this one. It's a different format, a different perspective, but it goes no less deep than some of these classics in my mind. I really like when albums have songs that aren't just kind of generically structured, you know, your hook chorus structure. Hook chorus, no, those are the same things. Hook verse, chorus verse, where every song kind of follows a formula, and of course the idea is iterate within them. But instead, I kind of like structures that are packed in with like weird ideas. Very, very diverse, almost unmusical interludes and breaks, trying to have this like cinematic cohesion across the entire album instead of just making packaged songs that each one of them could like fit onto the radio somehow. And here there's this sense of godlike compositional mania where his ambitions, his vision of the music is so clear, so manically complex, that he stops at nothing to kind of like manifest it without any sort of consideration for the packageability, for the radio friendliness, anything like that. And again, some of my favorite albums are in this mode. Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom, just this sprawling, diverse kind of opera of prog rock. Cloud Dead's self-titled, a really weird kind of hipstery rap that again just toys with all sorts of different modes and medias and samples. And the Richard D. James album, which is one of the finest from Aphex Twin, that just seems... you know what? I should have put Drooks. I think Drooks is a better example than RDJ album. I was kind of like thinking of Drooks in my head too. Anyways, like some really intense IDM breakcore sort of album where you can see that there's really no limits in their mind to what it could become. And this is the highest praise I can give music. To compare it to these sorts of things, to say, these are my favorite types of albums. These are my favorite albums in those categories. This measures up with that. This is, I can't overstate it. I'm going to open the door quick. It's getting hot in here. I'm getting heated thinking about this album. All right, yeah, so it's great. Let's get a little more specific about some stuff I liked about it. The production here goes absolutely nuts at times. I'd say there's two kind of primary philosophies that sort of dictate how the production for each track is built, and they're seemingly in quite a lot of conflict. One, which is prominent kind of more on the first half of the album, really foregrounds live instruments, the sense of those actually being performed, the physicality of the instrument. You hear the reverb creaking on a piano. You hear guitars really being like plucked and vibrating. You see this relative space being born where you can actually kind of visualize the position of the microphones in the studio. There's that kind of really session-y recording live feel. And the other foreground's artificiality. They do things like kind of blow out speakers, blowing out the recording limits to make kind of things noisy. Sometimes when there's a sample, it kind of comes in this like impossible space where it's like impossibly clear, in contrast to the more physically plausible mastering of other things that it could be like a live performance. Sometimes the synths, they use like real classic like 808 type era stuff or things that evoke that, or synth instruments. This reminds me a lot of the Bon Iver album 22 A Million, the way they use like the saxes and piano and stuff in that. It's almost like an iconic representation of itself rather than the thing itself, just this purity and distillation. From a purely sonic perspective, I really like these two extremes being pushed. I really just enjoy the contrast between them and how they feel in my ears. I seek out music that kind of hits extremes in either of these directions. Usually, to kind of get something that really focuses on these qualities and like emphasizes that part of these as like a part of the music, I have to go to like pretty weirdo music, right? So like Japanese naivist folk. This is like home recorded folk music that has like a little scene in Japan that I really like, where it's really all about, you know, the physical performance. You can hear, oh, this guitarist is playing further away. Oh, you can hear the guy kind of like stomping along on the floor to keep time. It just kind of feels like you're right there in this impromptu, very low key concert. On the other hand, you have record labels like Orange Milk, the artist Giant Claw on them, that really foreground, you know, all of these artificialities, or something like 106 Point Never, their Echo Jam series, things that just sound totally unearthly and are almost parodies in relation to the actual sounds that they're like depicting. So normally I have to go to these sorts of extremes to hear someone that really wants to foreground these elements. But when I was listening to Untitled Unmastered a lot, this was something that was still being triggered. There was still this sort of focus I felt when things were artificial. There's like this really weird like horn sample pretty deep into the album, and some of the drum kits and stuff. But then on the other hand, many tracks really did have that kind of like session feel where you could hear the subtle reverbs of the snare and you knew it was just the microphone right there in the studio. And I love that. I really loved that focus, and that's why that album, I think, really sticks out in my mind. And so, when I heard this album, and I realized that this was becoming such a focus again, it's like knowing that that little seed of experimentation that I saw in Untitled Unmastered, to realize that it was also very special to Kendrick, that it represented something that he wanted to explore more. That's so exciting. That's one of the great joys, I think, in being a fan in general. When you can recognize something that seems really interesting that the artist is doing, and then you see them as well really highlight it and bring it to fruition because they also know that that was something really special that they tapped into. There's a very deep sense of communication there. It feels like, you know, you really are understanding them on a very meaningful level. Wow, it kind of reminds me of HBK Euphonium, episode 8, where they took the one fairly minor subplot that I was most interested in, that I thought was so special, and then they made a whole episode about it, and they were like, yes, this is the actual point of the show, and I felt like a goddamn brain genius. But hopefully I'll have a little less to say about this album than episode 8 of HBK Euphonium, where I wrote something like 40,000 words on my blog. Haha, that's reasonable behavior. Let's talk a little bit about the guest features. Amazing. Dude, when they got Ghostface to come in with this bonus verse, it reminded me so much of Raekwon coming in on Gorgeous with that kind of feeling of like just when you thought it was over, it goes so hard. But honestly, this might even be harder than that. Just hearing the opening syllables of Ghostface's verse, I felt like throwing my chair off the balcony and becoming a viral sensation and starring in a Drake video. There's that very strange track. It's an argument between Kendrick and the actor Taylor Page. I was blown away by this. It was like the sheer visceral sound of hearing people like fight like that and scream at each other and just pushing the limits of their vocal cords with their rage. It drilled into my brain. It felt like when I listened to like Japanoise, like Masana or Hantarashi or the Gero Gere Gege, where they're just like screaming, and the point is the visceral screaming feeling. I love that feeling, to be clear. That's a positive uncomfortableness to me. But it was also hilarious. I was like cracking up at points, but it was also pretty tragic. And then at the end, kind of beautiful almost. This fragile reconciliation, this sense of kind of a stability of chaos. I don't know, man. It really tapped into something very primal in the human condition. The Beth Gibbons feature, it's like one of those things where like you can tell that Kendrick is a huge Portishead fan, right? and that getting Beth was like a dream to him. Having her sing on this track, having her give such like a ghostly, haunting performance, you can just tell it was huge. Because it doesn't really make any like PR sense to get Beth Gibbons to show up on your hip hop album, right? So you can only attribute it to like this is true passion, and it really I think makes it all the more beautiful. Baby Keem, I love Baby Keem. I'm ride or die forever for Baby Keem. I I don't know why, man. I just really like that album, the Melodic Blue. I listened to that like 500 times, and he's got some great features here. He just does what he does. There's so much Kodak Black on this album. He just got out of prison or whatever not too long ago, and I hadn't heard like anything else from him from prison, from after prison that is. And this is pretty controversial because he's done some pretty heinous shit. I do like Kodak Black a lot. He's got a few tracks that I think are just absolute bangers, especially when he raps in that like really foreboding, like menacing, kind of raspy but like infinite energy, determined. And Kendrick like really puts him into that starring role whenever he shows up on this album. So I was impressed. Cancel me, but I was impressed. This guy DJ Dahi, never even heard of him, but it's a track where he says sheesh. Sheesh. I say that too much. I'm addicted. That meme will never die. I think it is dying out, maybe. But if I'm in like a restaurant, if I'm like out in a crowded area, I hear people saying it. It echoes. If anyone says it within a mile, you hear it. So I know there's other shishers still alive. Sampha is here. I love Sampha. Maybe just my number one voice of like all musicians is Sampha. He does like a really great performance here. It's not kind of his typical like, oh, Sampha gets the part where he sings. It kind of has this like weird melodies, sound hella British in a way that's somehow appealing. It's fantastic. Okay. So clearly, I really like this album. I sonically, as just a listening experience, it blew me away. It was a 10 out of 10 performance. But what does it mean? Let's kind of dive in a little bit to the lyrical themes and stuff. But before we do, I want to kind of motivate this by looking at it at a bit more of a meta angle. Okay, so I think there's basically 3 layers to analyzing the lyrical aspects of music. First is on a level of just like the sonic vocal performance, the delivery of the lyrics, and your immediate gut reaction to knowing English and hearing English words. I think this is something people overlook sometimes when they think about kind of like analyzing in a text, that thinking about the meaning of words and sentences and what is being conveyed and the story is being told happens kind of like only after intellectual thought. But like, I don't know, there's things that you instinctively immediately react to when you hear. Everything really will elicit some immediate subconscious response within yourself just knowing English words. So I think on some level, like just kind of the tone of the album, the feel of the album, moments of depression, moments of triumph, these things can come through with like zero analysis. Just if you're paying any amount of attention on a deep individual level, you will have like your emotions resonate. Next is actually taking a step back and looking at the text in a literary context. What is the deeper meaning of it? What is he saying about the human condition? And how effectively and interestingly does it convey these ideas? And this is where it's a little bit more of a dispassionate intellectual analysis, Are these compelling arguments? Is this an interesting narrative through line? Do we understand kind of like how he's arriving at the ideas he's arriving at? Shit for nerds. And this is where it gets really interesting, though, on this final third layer. Thinking about the moral lesson of the text. What is it conveying about the creator's character? What kind of person is he to be saying this? And what change does it try to make in the world? How effective is it in making that change based on its message, based on its themes? And do you support the change that it wishes to create in this world? All right. You may have heard me talk about art on these three tiers before: emotional reaction, literary quality, and moral messaging. If you have heard that before, you are a Keats the Mega fan. You dove in deep to a long ass video. If not, though, don't worry. We'll cover it a little more later. This initial breakdown of this structure. Okay, so on the first two layers, Kendrick absolutely excels. He kills it, right? Like, on the first layer of empathetic reaction to another human being's expression, is one of the most powerful things I've ever heard. I don't even know what I can say about it. It was so moving, so powerful. His vulnerability, his intimacy, his passion, his anger at times, his frustration at times, his confusion at times, but then also his joy, his love, his reconciliation. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. We'll talk about the second layer more later, but let's address the third layer. And let's address what is, for me, the elephant in the room: the Pitchfork review. So, Pitchfork posted recently their review of this album, which they gave a 7.6. And you might think, all right, that's a good score. It rounds up to 8. 8 is reasonable. Pitchfork's average score is something like a 6.7 or something like that, so it's above average. It's a good album. It's not just best new music or whatever. And you might think, well, but I mean, this is actually pretty shocking. It's almost hilariously low, given how big of Kendrick fans they were before. Not just that they were huge fans and they were scoring his albums highly, but they seem to be constantly admonishing themselves and reevaluating higher their past reviews. In that, you know, they only gave To Pimp a Butterfly a 9.3, but then when it came to be album of the year, it was album of the year, and then when it was best of the decades list, they like bumped it up way above albums with higher scores, and Damn was album of the year, and it just kind of seems like they were really championing and pushing Kendrick up until this point. That they didn't just want to say this is great music, but they wanted to say this is the most important music. This is the music you should be giving the most focus to of this time. So I read the review. It really praises the album on pretty much every sonic level. There's a few comments that might be taken as like neutral or like, isn't this interesting? But almost all the judgments they have on the actual production and kind of existence of the album is very positive. And then even on the first two layers of meaning that I talked about, like the raw emotional connection on layer 1 and the literary sophistication on layer 2, it's straight praise. They praise his vulnerability. They reflect on how interesting the narrative cohesion is. They talk about the power and virtuosity of his performance. All very high praise. So why such a low score? The only major points of direct criticism are Kodak Black is on it. He's a terrible person, pled guilty to battery and assault, various rape charges circling around him. Who knows about those? They're like, oh, is he here because Kendrick is trying to redeem him in the public spotlight? Or is that Kendrick can like relate to him because he sees Kodak Black as being unfairly treated? I think it's not such a strict dichotomy. It's a little more complicated than that, but whatever. He's a bad person. He's being really promoted here. He's given a very prominent role. That's no good. There's tracks where he talks about things like trans people or other kind of like current social issues. And Pitchfork argues, oh, he didn't really give proper treatment. It's too self-centered. He should be amplifying their voices rather than talking about his own role. Blah, 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 blah. Sure. And then overall, it seems like their major argument, and I think this is like kind of the closing remark, is that before Kendrick was like a very consistent, like well portrayed person that felt like he experienced kind of complete narrative arcs and represented something very praiseworthy, that he was a shining exemplar of something they wanted to see. Now it's like, oh, what kind of self-portrait is he painting? Is this like a heel turn? Is he becoming selfish? Is he casting aside the roles people have put him on? That's no good. That's too messy. That's not as compelling. So in summary, basically Kendrick used to be a champion of their politic, that he represented the social causes they wanted to see in the world and was kind of like pristine in doing so. And now he is problematic. That it's not like he ever walked back and said, "Oh, well, the police are actually okay," and it's not like, he was like, "Ah, gang violence, that's not such a big deal." It's just that now he's offering his perspectives on other things, and they're like, that's no good. This really seems to be the reason the score is so low relative to the amount of praise they gave it. They praised it as if it was like a high 8, at least. And then I don't know if you can hear that. It's like a farting motorcycle going by. The brapping two-wheeler. Terrible. But yeah, it seems like they can't really praise him that much because the art in some sense is immoral, and that promoting immoral things is such a non-starter. Promoting things that are consistent with their values is paramount. So you might think, wow, Pitchfork is moralizing the culture around an album instead of actually reviewing music. What else is new? And yeah, that's true. That is pretty true. Pitchfork does love to do this. Just look at their Donda review where they crucified my boy. But first off, I am a Pitchfork defender, right? Like, I've loved Pitchfork for about 18 years by my estimate. I've been reading it at least semi-consistently. When I first really got into music, and I was like, I want to learn a lot about music, I want to diversify my tastes as much as possible, I want to find the stuff that's going to resonate with me most out of all the music that exists. Their top albums of various decade lists provided me so much of that early education. I think those are like so well written, so well selected. They really bring out like why the classics are classics, why landmark albums had the influence they did. It's just fantastic music writing. And every day they're putting out great reviews. The vast majority of their reviews, of which there's thousands, are reasonable, informative, and written from a place of really infectious enthusiasm. Even though sometimes they're very smarmy and nerdy about things and overly analytical, but come on. How am I going to hate on that? Not how big a hypocrite I would be if I was like, nah, they're too nerdy about this. And yeah, okay, they do have these kind of politically motivated like hit scores where they trash somebody, they deny them the BNM, or conversely, they pluck an album that might not be that big a deal or be all that great and be like, no, this is what we want the culture to move towards, so therefore it's a 9 or whatever. Even when they do that, I think that's pretty fascinating and compelling. I think they serve as like a barometer for the cultural forces in popular music. And one that's like very prominent and has a big readership and actually can make a difference when they weigh in one way or another. We've seen things like the rise and fall of white man's indie, the trap boom, poptimism and post-poptimism. All of these I witnessed, both in Pitchfork articles, and then I saw the detritus of these takes floating downstream, these great cultural proclamations creating whirlpools of discourse. And by that I mean I went on the 4chan board Mew and I saw people shitposting about Pitchfork day in and day out. So, all I'm trying to say is it means something that Pitchfork did this, that they made this choice. It's going to, for better or worse, and in this case I really think worse, shape a lot of the discourse around this album. This time they've gone too far. That up until a point, I thought, this is interesting the way they're doing this. But this time it hit too close to home, and I'm a little too upset. This is, I think, the most I've ever disagreed with a score of theirs. Probably not in terms of sheer numbers, but in terms of like how they thought about and they approached the album. How in terms they actually reviewed it, and that review was reflected in the score. Probably the real winner for like the biggest gap between my hypothetical score and their actual score is some Sun Kil Moon album where they're like, this is just an old man talking about what he ate for breakfast. 3.6. And I'm like, wow, this is just an old man talking about what he ate for breakfast. 8.9. But to look at it from another formula, if we're looking at these three layers of meaning in lyrics, I think they vastly overrated the importance of layer 3, the moral messaging, compared to 1 and 2, which they admit are fantastic. And in doing so, they come across as very, very demanding of particular messages from all of their media, and thus very unempathetic, which is tragically ironic, given the value of empathy pretty much is the message of this album. And we'll get more into this later. We'll really break down why I think that's one of the main messages and why I think Pitchfork shat all over it. But yeah, this really bugged me. Obviously, we're up to 3 slides and counting about this review. But I realized why this was bothering me so much. It wasn't just frustration at Pitchfork being ignorant. There's also a nagging feeling of hypocrisy. Is this really how you spell hypocrisy? I thought there was an I here. But I assume I changed it to this because spelling error thing popped up. Whatever. All right. I promised we would revisit this, so we will. The great Wadaten argument. So do you remember like 3 years ago, I was trying to review a season of anime, and I ended up talking myself in circles for like an hour about morality in art, and how do you judge the intent of an artist? And what does it even mean to value art? What does it mean when you say, this is good? And this was all because I couldn't figure out what score to give a problematic anime. I remember at one point I came up with this geometric argument where we had overlapping circles of like, this is the message of the show, this is the real world, where there's a gap, you can perceive the artist's intent, this is the fantasy / desire element of a text. I don't really remember what point I was trying to ultimately make. You know, whenever I look back at some stuff I've done, like that video or my blog posts about Hibike Euphonium episode 8, I'm like, wow, I was like really manic back then. Why was I doing that? But, you know, maybe later I'll look back at this video and be like, wow, I was really manic. Why did I say so much about some Kendrick album? So basically my argument in that Wadaten video breaks down into some pretty simple points. First off, I argued that actually morality isn't super important in art. It isn't super necessary. I think what I said is like, when it's there and it's fine, it's kind of like a cherry on top, that it's like, oh, you know, and this had a nice message too. And when it's not there, you don't really miss it. If it's something that's like irreverent, if it's just for the sake of itself, it's just an experience, I don't think many people leave such a thing and go, okay, but what did that tell me about how I should live my life, right? At the same time, though, I argued that if something really sticks with you, it really impacts you, often that is due to it resonating on a moral level. And it's not just because, you know, we prioritize learning things about how we should live our life over artistic experiences and emotional stuff like that. In fact, I would say usually it's the opposite, that it's kind of difficult to grasp the moral message of something. But if you do and it resonates with you and it seems important, it really enlivens the text. It really makes everything that happens in that story all the more interesting, all the more engaging. And then it saturates your brain a lot more, that you find yourself recalling it in different situations and actually trying to apply it to your life. Such that I feel like for a lot of people, like the biggest masterpieces in their life in terms of books that really stuck with them, movies that really stuck with them, they'll often cite, oh, it really changed the way I thought. It really, you know, I mean, is this true? I don't know. This is true for me. This is true for some people I've talked to. Maybe other people, it's like, you know, that's my favorite movie because it makes me laugh harder than any other movie. That's totally valid too. But I think at the time, at least, I was really operating under this basis of the biggest masterpieces are masterpieces because of this moral resonance. And conversely, It's kind of like, well, it can either be the cherry on top or it can be like the turd on top. And if there's a turd on top of your food, no matter how good the food is, it sucks. Uh, when you think something has bad moral messaging, when you just can't agree with it, when you think it's promoting something bad in the world, I think that's about, or at the time at least, I thought this is about the biggest detriment a piece of art can have. And finally, and this is what really the whole argument hinges on, that makes it even sensible to talk about, and where I ended up spending most of my time trying to make diagrams and stuff, is that you can reliably deduce the moral messaging of a text even without violating the death of the author, even without having to consult with statements from the author or anything. You can use these types of analysis to work out what kind of moral message the text is sending. Okay, well, I was thinking about this album and I was thinking about the Pitchfork review, and I was thinking about the sort of things Pitchfork criticized, and my conclusion is that I really had a very naive view of morality in art when I made that video. So we're rethinking it again. Revisiting my argument now in the context of my annoyance at Pitchfork, you absolutely cannot consistently determine the moral messaging of a text. The method I came up with, I think it's pretty clever, but it's based on the idea that you can actually really distinguish the meaning of the text and what the world of the text is, and that you have like an accurate understanding of the societal context in which it's made in order to understand where these two things separate and stuff. That's that's too much. This is probably very obvious to everyone that you can't reliably just understand a text completely by concentrating your huge brain at it. But look. I was an English student, right? I was a pretty good English student too. I went hard. All I ever did was read stuff and make meaning of it. That was just the most important part of my life for years, was doing these sorts of assignments or working as my tutoring job and working with other people's assignments. This is what I've been built up to do. So to throw my hands up and say, I don't know, it's all really personal. It's pretty distant from my own experiences. I just don't think I can really know what the things he's saying really mean to him on a personal level. Or to go like, well, yeah, he said something, that's not really my take on the situation. But clearly he's looking at it from another perspective than me. He's seeing it differently than me. And I really deeply feel him on a human level, even if I can't share that vantage point. Or even just like, I don't know what he's referencing here. I don't know what this means. This clearly means something to him, but I don't get it. Oops. You know what? If I said something like that, that's tantamount to giving up. That's tantamount to accepting a bad grade. It frustrates me. It genuinely frustrates me to admit something like that, to let it be at that level without arriving at some satisfying end, arriving at some complete picture of the text, some complete picture of the creator's worldview. Like my goal all the time is working the text on layer 2, the literary analysis layer, enough that you can make some sort of meaning on layer 3 and say, even though this text is oblique, even though it's very personal, even though I can't really share this perspective, simply by staring it down and learning context and figuring out references, I can understand what this text is trying to say about the world. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just can't get there. And this Pitchfork guy could not. I would say this was an essay I would give a bad grade. Very poorly reasoned, very poorly supported. Alright, but if you thought my lesson here was, oh, well, I guess sometimes the morality of something is unknowable, just because that Pitchfork guy can't do it doesn't mean that I can't. Alright, let's get into it. We've warmed up enough with this meta-analysis. Let's actually do some lyrical analysis. Let's try to make some meaning with literary analysis. What do I like better, more? What do I like in life better than this? To drive meaning from text and hear the lamentations of those that doubt my takes. Well, actually, there's quite a few things I like better, but this is up there. This is something I really like doing. Okay, so to me, this isn't a bombshell, and it's pretty obvious. The album's all about therapeutic change. There's this kind of rough structure to it. It's almost kind of a concept album. It's almost a story from track to track, but it's kind of loose. It's not very tightly bound to that. But it's meant to be like a therapy appointment. It's meant to be Kendrick coming in, spilling his guts, and coming to revelations. Kendrick makes this very explicit at some point. There's a few lines where he talks about people telling him to get therapy, boy, you need therapy, blah, blah, blah. His fiance says a few lines here and there that are from the perspective she's playing the therapist. These serve as really nice punctuation across the album and help you kind of break down where in the appointment he is, where in this revelation he is. And this journey through his mental health really is a journey. And I think this is so key to what makes this album so compelling, is that he really learns and changes throughout the album. You can see him learn things and then like apply that perspective on a later track. You can feel him form like one connection between two areas of his life, and then later that connection is revisited, and you can see that it's like underscored with like more examples, that he's gone deeper in this chain of memory, and he can make the association stronger. And this is like the actual work you do in therapy. I've been in therapy for years, and this is very consistent with like meaningful work that gets done. You learn something in one session, and then the next session some other incident has happened in your life, and you're thinking, okay, well, how can I apply what I learned last time to this? Or you realize, oh, there's a connection between this traumatic experience in my youth and my hesitancy to do that. And then you go, okay, what other examples are there? What other times throughout my life has this caused me problems? And this is what really works. This is what really helps you become a more self-actualized person. I'm amazed at how this is both in like the macro sense and the micro sense. Across the entire album, you see this one overall journey of revelation. And then in specific tracks, when he gets into particular traumas, particular ideas that he's struggling with, within that very track, you'll see a microcosm of this arc. And just kind of comparing like the first and last verses of a lot of songs is really profound. That it really shows like he's come to learn something. Auntie Diaries, near the end of the album, this is a track that's attracting a lot of attention, because Kendrick talks very explicitly about some trans people in his life, and I think this is brilliant, and Pitchfork person didn't seem to get it, that his language changes as he evokes who he was at different parts of the stories he's telling. So at the start, he's using the wrong pronouns for his uncle, and then as he begins to understand their gender identity and what they've done, then he starts changing the pronouns, and he starts changing just how he's referring to him in general. It's really powerful and touching, and it's Joycean. James Joyce would be proud. Joyce is all about this stuff, dude. The Portrait of the Artist as a young man, writing Stephen's memories with the language of a child, the Oxen of the Sun and Ulysses, the birth of language coming through with the birth of... it's fantastic. Let's go, Kendrick. All right, let's continue our quest for meaning and morality. So the major arc of this album is one of growing empathetic authenticity. He starts off feeling like he's in a position of performance. He's in a spotlight, and people are always demanding him to be a hero, to be an icon, and if necessary, to be a martyr for certain causes and peoples and ideas. And this is Kendrick 101 stuff. This is the role that, the most curious glance at him and his credentials and his career and the praise that his tracks have received, it would be obvious that he's been thrust into this kind of position. Because, after All Right came out, there was no more police brutality. But now there is actually more police brutality, and a whole other lot of things are going wrong. There's like a pandemic, there's a major depression, you know, rampant inequality, housing crises. There's like a baby food shortage now. Maybe Kendrick can solve every problem. Maybe on this new album there'll be a track called "Give Them Kids Their Food." and he'll start rapping about how profit margins don't compare to rumbling tummies. This is so cringy. But this is honestly what I think some people expect from Kendrick. That he's just gonna go like track by track and quote unquote fix society's woes. Because to a certain type of like lib person, seeing someone talk about something in a way that's like controversial and causes discourse is the same as actually taking an action to fix something. Okay, I don't want to get too much into this. I don't want to just like shit on people. But this is clearly the perspective I think Pitchfork has always had of Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar is a hero for justice. And you know, it's pretty on the nose. This idea of Kendrick is stuck performing. There's these little intermissions where he's tap dancing. You can hear, it's awesome sonically, just the acoustic sound of his feet performing on the stage. And it's in this mode though. It's in this position where he's talking about how like his back is up against the wall, microphone's in his face all the time. Everything he says is going to be a big deal. People are expecting him to somehow solve problems. And here, it is in this perspective that he says these problematic things. That he bemoans cancel culture. Cancel culture, what is that? I'll say whatever I like, blah, blah, blah. Being skeptical of COVID, you know, oh, you're back outside now. Take off your mask. There's masks on babies. This little anecdote where basketball player, I can't think of his name, Kyrie Irving. So that sounds like a name, right? Kyrie something refused to get vaccinated out of some misguided solidarity or something, and then Kendrick was like, nah, I don't know, and then that guy got sick, and Kendrick's like, nah, I don't know. So these are things that like Pitchfork called out as being kind of problematic, and I've seen some other discourse online around as being like, whoa, Kendrick, whoa, shit, dude, you can't say these things. But like, to me, situated in the story this album is telling, these aren't like his genuine, authentic, I got a bone to pick. He's not being like Kid Rock. He's not being like, let me air out the wrongs of the world. Because the whole idea is that he doesn't want to do that. That he's been put into a position where they expect him to do that. So instead, I think it's just a very functional example of like, he's got all of this chaos in his brain. He's trying to kind of sort through this absolute jumble of the world. And you got to realize, like, if you're watching this, if you're me, if you're a Pitchfork writer especially, you are within a bubble. And what you understand to be reasonable takes on a subject, and, you know, discounting everything else as unreasonable, puts you in a very tiny percentage of the population. Things like COVID, things like cancel culture, things like... there's other examples, but those are matters of ongoing debate across America at large, right? And you can say, okay, but the other side is idiotic. The other side is evil. Sure, but if you're in a position like Kendrick, where you're like an icon, where people are seeing you as a savior, it's not so easy to be dismissive and say, okay, well, one half of my fans are dumb as bricks for being skeptical of COVID. Because I'm sure he hears all sorts of stuff that we don't. And on the other hand, doesn't hear a lot of stuff that we do. Man, I don't know. This is all probably unnecessary to elaborate so much on, but like, I think it's very important to think about his actual perspective on these things. Not just literally what he's saying, but what it means in terms of this overall story of the album. Like, he changes a lot since he says those things. And I'm not saying, oh, he changed his opinion off screen and now he's pro-vax or whatever. But just that it's these things he realizes aren't so important to him by the end of the album. So he eventually busts free of this responsibility to have a take on everything, to be the savior of everything, because he realizes that he has an even greater duty to his family, his friends, and most of all to himself. So I'd say this is a big deal for the album. The healing power of self-empathy. So now that he kind of has this new perspective on what really matters to him and the roles that he ought not to hold himself to, he revisits a lot of episodes in his life. He re-explores a lot of trauma. He contextualizes these struggles in their social context, sure, but his work with it is very deeply personal. He thinks, and here, he's always had that balance where he looks at something that's obviously a societal problem and he kind of analyzes the societal causes of it, and then he sort of advocates for a position of personal responsibility, of personal actualization, and not being defined by societal constraints or whatever. Here it seems even more comfortable that he's okay with just saying, this is about me, this is about how I deal with things, this isn't about solving a societal issue. He rebuilds his self-image by looking at the impact he's had on people who matter most. And this is so touching, so sentimental, so beautiful. And he deeply appreciates the love he feels from them. And it isn't presented as easy or inevitable to get to this point, but it's a very difficult and deliberate struggle to learn this empathizing, to feel okay. In a triumphant climax, it's probably going to be one of the more famous parts of the whole album, he repeats, "I choose me. I'm sorry." He's sorry that he's letting people down. He's sorry that they can't be the savior he wants. But for the sake of the people he loves most, he has to choose himself. It's really beautiful, really inspirational. It's a very well-realized, realistic quest to achieve this sense of true self-empathy. And this really, really hits for me. The idea of empathizing with yourself is probably the major lesson I have been trying to learn for like 3 years as I work in therapy with my current therapist. I would say this is probably overall the largest struggle I have with my mental health, is that I have a very hard time empathizing with myself. And a lot of the other problems I have are like downstream of that. So it's like one of those albums just like too perfect for me. I am dealing with this like right now in a lot of ways. I went through a situation where I had to choose myself and I felt really, really deeply sorry about it. But in the end, I had to feel sorry for myself too, and to give myself that chance and to empathize with what I wanted and what I needed. And I think this is the lesson that matters. This is the actual takeaway you're supposed to have from the album. It's way more a representation of his values and who he is as a person and how he thinks we should live than, oh, is he pro-mask or anti-mask? Oh, is he fine with Kodak Black or does he want him sent back to jail? Those things are trivial compared to like, this is how you must relate to yourself. This is how you should treat yourself. I mean, so like, what the fuck? Pitchfork says this is a heel turn? What? I think this is a really beautiful and important message that we can all stand to learn. To empathize with yourself. It's the least heel thing I can imagine. Like, God. Alright, but like, okay, well, why is Kodak Black there? Did he really have to get someone who is probably like a serial abuser or whatever? And, yeah, I mean, there's some things that he says, some choices on the album, and I'm like, eh. But, like, Kodak Black, I love how he is as a rapper, but maybe he is beyond the pale for such a major guest. I don't know. I don't know enough about what he did, and I don't have strong enough, consistent opinions on, I'm not going to like rappers that do X, the rappers that do Y are fine. And I think COVID is something to take very, very seriously, and that vaccinations are good and real, and wearing your mask all the time is good and real, and like we shouldn't be taking it lightly or being dismissive of science or whatever. And, this is something that's always bugged me about Kendrick, is that he's very much about the individual. And this arc we've seen many times of like, I was shit on by society, but through personal empowerment, I was able to overcome and achieve great things despite these problems in society. I wish he didn't take such a personal burden for these societal problems. I guess what I want is more revolutionary action, an explicitly anti-capitalist Kendrick or something, which, I'm not actually seriously expecting to get. But again, in this album, I was kind of a little more like, don't just be down on yourself. It's great that you can overcome this, but be mad at society a little more. So, there are things that I'm like, well, that's not my take. But this is what I've learned to do. I can just say, yeah, that's not my take. But he's clearly looking at it from another way than for me. I deeply feel him on a personal level. And it's okay to say this. It's the empathetic thing to do. It's the thing that really respects his work and respects who he is as a person. To know that there's limits to how much you can see through his eyes, to how much meaning you can make from the album. It's not giving up. It's not... I'm not going to get a bad grade on this video, please. Please give me an A. Like, comment, and subscribe. Comment A+, good job. Best in class. It's not the same as giving up. It's just acknowledging that there's limits to the understanding I can have of things. Yeah. This has been very therapeutic for me. Undoing some of the trauma of being a very manic English student, I suppose. And, when I say this, there's only so far I can understand where he's coming from. That's not just like a race thing or a class thing in either direction, either his very poor, humble upbringings, or now the fact that he's famous and filthy rich and stuff. But it is those things too. Like, those do create gaps in my understanding. But mostly it's because this is a representation of the intimacy of therapy. This is a representation of the sort of innermost thoughts that he lets out in very private, personal contexts. I shouldn't try to be making meaning of it like this is a pamphlet he's handing out at a strike. This isn't supposed to be a gospel for the way he thinks the world ought to be. This is therapy. And I think it's much more meaningful and impactful analyzed at that level. I really think Pitchfork misses the forest for the trees by fixating on his sins. Instead of thinking about what this album is actually saying about how to be a human being, they see me here just bucket Kendrick in an out group with zero good faith. So, I think this is once again our cue to exit the vampire castle. The real tragedy of this is that it spits in the face of the album itself. And I alluded a bit to this earlier, that the moral message of the album is that Kendrick's perspective is valuable, that this perspective shift he had and the way it's allowed him to kind of reinterpret himself that's good. That's something that everyone should try to do, that you should understand the world on this local communal level with lots of self-empathy and not see yourself as some societal messiah. And to be clear, again, as I said, I don't fully agree with that. I think things should be addressed on the societal level. I want to see societal solutions. I don't think individualism can last. And here I relate to Mark Fisher, may his dear soul rest in peace, who wrote the essay Exiting the Vampire Castle, who was always first to put a class analysis on things and to not settle for, okay, well, in the end, the individual can recover, but instead, no, we need societal cures. But I do see a very valuable lesson in saying, and this is something Kendrick also says too, is that we need to take people in good faith. If they share the same core values as us, we should be way more empathetic and open about their conclusions. And that goes for people in your community, and that goes for, like, you yourself. You gotta take yourself in good faith. And this is, of course, as well the thrust of Exiting the Vampire Castle, which I wish every leftist should read. It's a little controversial almost, because it kind of seems like he's like, oh, we're being too sensitive, and that always kickstarts some terrible discourse. But, like, I think taking people in good faith isn't a bad thing. when you have this perspective, Pitchfork is like, nah. It's so frustrating. I'm so frustrated. The more I think about it, the more frustrated I get. I thought this video would be cathartic. It would get it out of my system and then I would stop caring. But instead, I just thought about it way too much. And now I'm mad. Anyways, no more talking about Pitchfork. No more talking about Pitchfork. In this boldly empathetic perspective, where we really drill down into the core humanity we share and not just try to outgroup each other and take each other in bad faith, suddenly there is allies all among us. It's beautiful. It's a journey we all share to a beautiful life. Some steps you take in society, and some steps you have to take just within yourself. So, I'm not surprised, but I ended up talking about theory stuff way more than I talked about the music. And, you know, in the end, I'm just like Pitchfork. But I'm really happy that this album kind of kickstarted some revelations in myself about how morality and art intersect for me. I felt like I was really challenged on this, to defend why I thought it was no big deal for Kendrick to have like Kodak Black and stuff, right? I wanted to feel more consistent in my appreciation of things that may be problematic or whatever. And I think I was able to rise to that challenge. But really, you know, the whole time I was making these slides, I was just listening to this album. And I was just feeling it, man. It's just so good. It's just big emotional bangers from wall to wall. And that's what's important. I'm gonna eventually, hopefully, I'll stop caring about all this Pitchfork stuff. I'll stop caring about the little problematic sins Kendrick commits. Those things will very quickly fade into irreverence for me as the actual messaging of the album, the actual sonic brilliance of the album resonates deeper and deeper. It's album of the year so far for me. Beat out even Ants from Up Here by Black Country New Road, which I literally only listened to that album nonstop for like a month. I was so obsessed with it. I'm amazed. This year has been so good for music. I'm so excited to put together the end of year list. I want to make something even sooner. I can't wait until the end of the year to talk about a lot of these albums. I can tell that this is an album that will end up being really precious for me. It just hits on so many levels in so many ways that I didn't expect. A long time ago, I was talking about Have One On Me, the Joanna Newsom album, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I talked about how, as I listened to it again and again throughout the years, in different contexts, in different phases of my own life, it built up this feeling of like a constellation, where certain moments would light up in my mind with a particular memory or particular association. And because the album is so huge, so sprawling and diverse, it felt like the distance between stars, that these types of emotional significance and where I was in my life could be light years apart. But that the album as a whole, I could see it as just this constellation, as this beautiful starry sky in totality, just by listening through to it. And I feel like this album has the same potential, that if I keep revisiting it for years to come, which I feel like I will, it'll have that same constellatory feel. Kendrick has come to love himself. I hope we can all come to love ourselves too. Whatever piece of art allows me to take a step in that direction, I'm so grateful. And that's all I got to say. Very good album. I really can't get over how much I liked it. Really excited to keep listening to it and to share even more thoughts about it in the future. Okay, bye.